Everyone, welcome to the Red and White Authority, episode number 4. Art Regner along with Kevin Allen, and today we're really going to focus a lot on the Detroit Red Wings, get to a couple of league issues as well. But Kevin, let's start off Wednesday night. You were at Joe Louis Arena, saw the new-look Red Wings. It might be a bit unfair to ask you this question, but at least let's put it this way. What were your early impressions, especially, and shall I use the cliche or the obvious, it looks like Zidlicki paid off in dividends already by scoring the game-winning goal in overtime.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when they made that trade, my first thought is that, you're not going to get the same benefit that some teams would get by having Zidlicki because the power play was already the best in the NHL. So, it's almost an embarrassment of riches to add Zidlicki to that power play, but it really made a difference. When you watch the puck flow, having an experienced guy over there with the right-hand shot to being able to send the puck across to him and for him to be open for the pass. Before he even scored, he had a nice shot on goal from over there on the left wing side on the power play. And I thought that you could see where he's going to have a real impact, and I thought it really kind of solidified the third pairing defense with Brendan Smith. So I really thought he really looked good. I thought Eric Cole, you could see that he's going to fit nicely because he can skate. And as we talked about the other day, what I like about it is he brings a dimension where the Red Wings would like to improve, and that is he's a physical player, a big-bodied player, and you can see that's going to work out. I thought he sort of his adjustment wasn't as smooth as Zidlicki, but I don't think it was cause for any alarm or anything. I just think he needs some time. Keith Yandel was in that game for the Rangers, and I think he's still adjusting to playing with them. I think it'll take those guys, 5, 6, 7, 8 games to get real comfortable. But you could see why they wanted both those guys, and you could see why they think they're a better team with those guys. In fact, Babcock said that after the game, which I thought was kind of interesting because he's not effusive in his praise usually, Babcock, but he said, I think these guys are going to help.
Well, I especially if you look at the way Babcock was as far as I don't know what Zidlicki's final ice time numbers were. I guess I should have looked at the score sheet, but it seemed like he was out there the whole game. Every time I turned around, number 28 was out on ice. I mean, I know he loves the right-handed shot, and I think a lot of Red Wing fans were looking forward to that. But boy, he really did see, for a guy, as you just said, who's just getting acclimated to the Red Wings in their system, he seemed to be out on the ice an awful lot in every situation.
Yeah, well, and it was I think it was his attempt to try to get them used to playing with the Red Wings group, and let's face it, like not only are you adjusting to the new team, your new teammates, but the systems are all different. Like every coach has a different way of forechecking and to when you evolve into defensive coverage, they're all a little bit different. I mean, hockey's still hockey, but everybody plays it just slightly differently. So I think he was trying to get them, as you said, acclimated to it. And it was an interesting game. Like the Red Wings didn't play a super game, to be sure, but Jimmy Howard was outstanding. And it was sort of the perfect script if you're a contending team. Is on the night when your team wasn't at its absolute best, your goalie bailed them out. I thought Howard was exceptional and played strong enough to give them the time they needed in order to win that game.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it really, if you walked away with one thing from the national telecast because it was on NBC TV or Sports, the fact is that Jimmy Howard was the standout performer for the Red Wings, and with all due respect to Jimmy, very rarely do you hear that. When they start talking about Detroit, usually it's Datsuk, Zetterberg, maybe Cromwell might occasionally get in there, but usually it's those two guys and the rest of the team. Is this what we're seeing is truly the maturation of Jimmy Howard? Is he at that next level? Because I think at the beginning of the season, like I told you before, Kevin, he kind of really, in August when they met informally, just down at the Joe, they'd open it up, and it's like getting the keys to the gym, and they'd go in there and have these informal practices. he just seemed a lot different for two reasons, I think. One, as I said, second son fatherhood, he was glowing. He was really proud, which is cool. And secondly, he knew he had a bad year last year, and there were a lot of doubters, and maybe perhaps three. The Munster won 16 games, and he was back, and Peter Mrazek is breathing down his neck. I mean, there are a lot of factors, I think, for Jimmy Howard this year to prove that not only is he a good goaltender, but that he can lead this team to a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think advanced stats have helped him too. I think people are able to see now. I remember seeing earlier in the year a story about the goaltending advanced stats, and statistics such as even strength save percentage and shorthanded save percentage, and Howard was among the league leaders in all of those. And there were some really strong reputation goalies like Jonathan Quick that looked really average when you compare how they perform when their teams are 5-on-5 or shorthanded. Now, obviously, Jonathan Quick is not average. He has 2 Stanley Cups and a Conn Smythe Trophy. But I think what it said to me is that maybe Jimmy Howard is better than fans think he is. Because statistics, a lot of people don't like advanced stats, but statistics don't lie. His save percentage is that 5-on-5, and really that's how games should be decided. Now, oftentimes we have dueling power plays, and it goes into that. But I think if you look at his playoff record and you look at the way he's played, he's been a good goalie. I don't think there's any question about that. The only question is whether or not he can, has the endurance to take them, through the gauntlet. The 4 rounds. There's 2 levels. You got to play well in the playoffs, but you also got to play well for 16 wins. And it's some guys have compared it to climbing Mount Everest or swimming the English Channel. It's a big feat. And until you've done it, you still have to prove that you can. And I think that's where Howard is now. But he was really good before he was injured, and I thought that game the other night showed he's back where he was before the injury.
Right, and unlike climbing Mount Everest, I don't know if you saw Real Sports this month with Brian Gumbel, but Jimmy Howard doesn't have a bunch of Sherpas doing the heavy lifting and almost. It's up to him. It's not. He has a sporting cast, obviously, and a great team around him. But in the end, he is. I'm riddled with cliches today, Kevin. He is the last line of defense. Kevin, when we're going to study the Red Wing defense a lot today, but I wanted to ask you something because I don't know if this is the paranoia of growing up in Detroit or if it's just the average, the way the hometown sports fan, when he looks at the national perception of his team. In the last couple of mornings, I've woken up and I've looked at the sports page and I've looked at the standings, and the Red Wings have 15 regulation losses, the least amount in all of the National Hockey League. And now it's teams have 17, and I think that's the closest to them. Obviously, and they're great in overtime, 4-on-4. They're 6-2, not a bad record. We can talk about the shootout. I think we've kind of, even beaten that. Even in episode 4, we've already talked about that enough. I think their troubles in the shootout. But my point is that when I hear them talk about legitimate Stanley Cup teams, and I've been able through the center ice package to watch the Canadiens the last couple nights late and see their entire games. Detroit is mentioned almost as an afterthought because they have to mention them, if that makes sense. It's like, well, yeah, then the Red Wings are there too, but when you really look at it, when they hone into the contenders, they talk about Montreal, the Rangers, Tampa Bay, maybe those are the top 3, and then the Red Wings are an afterthought. Is that because they're a victim of their own success, or are there really in a series, and we've talked about the physicality, in a Stanley Cup playoff series, are there some doubts at about the Red Wings? And is that why they're not getting maybe some influence? And I hear this a lot, their proper due.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't think they are getting their proper due. If you look at how, I think the reason they haven't is because they have not been successful against Tampa Bay and Montreal. And I think everybody looks at Montreal and Tampa Bay as 2 teams with a legitimate shot to get to the Stanley Cup final. The Lightning have improved significantly, particularly on defense. Cooper coming in there has made a difference for that team. Yzerman's been very aggressive. Colburn, the last addition, almost feels like a missing piece for them. Bishop, if he can stay healthy, looks like their goalie that can carry them as well. And of course, Montreal has been very consistent until just recently when they've had trouble. But the Red Wings have had trouble against them. You pointed that out, and it's accurate. 15 regulation wins, but within their own division, they don't have a great record. And I think people have taken note of that. But I think the Red Wings are doing exactly what you want to do if you're going to be a legitimate contender. I think they've sort of built up and built on the wins they've had early, and now they're getting down the stretch, and they look like a pretty effective team right now. Like I think they look as strong as Montreal or Tampa Bay. In fact, both since the All-Star break, I'm pretty sure the Red Wings have a better record than both Tampa Bay and Montreal. And Montreal's had a little bit of rough going recently, so. I think they're a legitimate contender. I think they have what you need in order to be successful. Let's look at, when you play, if Detroit plays Montreal, you're going to say that Montreal has the goaltending edge. But if they play the Tampa Bay Lightning, do you say that Bishop is better than Howard? I don't think you can say that. Bishop's never played an NHL playoff game, and Howard has played and has actually been quite good in the postseason. So, I think. They can match up, and they could win that series against Tampa. I don't think they'd be favored in it, but I think they can win it, and I think they're capable of beating Montreal, although I think that task will be harder because Carey Price, I think, is an exceptional goal.
Right. It is just odd because when you really do look at the entire situation, I just sometimes think that because it'll be 24 straight seasons, consecutive seasons, because there was, the lockouts and all that kind of stuff. There wasn't a season and all that Detroit is almost an afterthought. I do believe that they're a victim of their success. It's like, the Red Wings are always there, and then eventually it was kind of like the year that Edmonton won the Stanley Cup almost out of nowhere with Mark Messier. Remember, Gretzky had left, and Edmonton was and then bam, they win it, and it's like, wow, they're kind of still Edmonton. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's jealousy or anything like that, but when you've been as good or as competitive as long as the Red Wings have, I just think people tend to forget about it.
Yeah, and in the olden days they had that one exceptional player. They had Yzerman, right. And they had Lidstrom, and they don't have that anymore. Datsuk's been great this season, and Zetterberg has played very well also. But they're both seen as guys that are in the twilights of their career. So the Tatar Nyquist generation of players doesn't have the same level of reputation. So I think that plays a role in it as well. But I think the other teams have respect. Like, I think you're talking about the fan bases and the media where they don't get as mentioned. But I guarantee you that Steve Yzerman sees the Red Wings as a snake in the grass, that he would not want his team to take the Red Wings lightly. And I'm sure the Canadians feel that as well. I mean, they can watch and see the fact that the Red Wings have played better as the season has worn on, and their defense, which we're going to talk a lot about in this podcast. Like I think that's been one of the biggest surprises in the league. Like if you go back to the start of last season, and what were fans saying? Detroit saying, "Oh boy, the Red Wings, they didn't get the guy. They were they couldn't win the Matt Niskanen sweepstakes. Dan Boyle didn't want to come here. There were a lot of issues." Well, that defense now, I mean, the smartest, sometimes the best trades you make or the best acquisitions are the ones you don't make. And, Kyle Quincy has played exceptionally well. And Brendan Smith has come of age. Danny DeKeyser is a better player. Cronwell's having a great year. Erickson is healthy. Suddenly now they've added Zedlicki, and, the young players, Ouellette, has stepped in, and Marchenko late in the year. Suddenly the Red Wings defense, it doesn't have the name value as, say, the Rangers defense or even Tampa Bay now. I mean, they have Victor Hedman and they got Strawman. But, it's been very effective, and it's been the kind of defense that, in my opinion, you can win with. The Devils, if you think back to when the Devils got to the final, this defense the Red Wings have is better than that defense. So if that Devils defense that got to the final that had Bryce Salvador and Green and I mean I think the Red Wings are better than they were, and they got all the way to the final a few years ago.
Well, another thing too, like the national perception seems to be that Detroit's a good defensive team, and that all five of them that they're still, even though it was the days of the Russian Five are over. When you look at the Red Wings style, it's more, regardless, it's still like kind of a five-man unit of whomever is out there, and that it's more of a team defense concept than it is. Just the six guys that are suiting up for the blue line for any individual game, I guess, is what I'm saying. I keep hearing team defense. Detroit's a good team defensively because they all buy in. But then again, isn't that, if you're going to play for Mike Babcock, that's the way you have to play?
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. Like the NHL has become so sophisticated now, and the defensive scheming is so dramatic that like the big thing in Pittsburgh this season was puck retrieval. Like the way the Penguins went back in their own zone and got the puck, was a major issue. That was part of the mandate that Johnson, when he came in to take over that team, part of his mandate is we got to find a way to get the puck out of our zone more effectively, because in the postseason, that's what it's all about. And when I was looking at that, obviously the Chicago Blackhawks, in my opinion, are the best at getting the puck out of their zone. They're very effective. But I think the Red Wings have done an excellent job with that. I mean, if you watch them, regularly, you realize that they can get the puck. I mean, they all have their moments where it looks like a fire drill back there, but they are pretty good at getting back in their zone and getting that puck and getting it back out and getting it in the neutral zone, and that's part of puck possession. But it's a big part of it now because the limiting scoring chances is what the game is all about. And the more time they spend in your zone, that's why advanced stats, they're always talking about zone starts and so forth. So I think that's where the Red Wings have really made some strides. I think they do a pretty good job of going back and getting the puck when it's dumped in and getting it out in a hurry.
Let's look at this defense then. Let's start with the by most accounts the first pair, which would be Nicholas Cromwell and Jonathan Ericsson. I'll be honest with you, Kevin. I like Jonathan Ericsson. He stands up for his team, and he's a big man, but he seems to be prone to turnovers. And sometimes when he's behind the net, he just wildly tries to clear the puck up the middle, which almost 10 out of 10 times appears to be a really great scoring chance for the other team. So I'm not as high as a lot of people, but when you look at that, obviously, Cromwell is very underrated. I think he always has been because he's not a big guy. If you were to put Cromwell and Ericsson, I think you would have, maybe the ultimate NHL defenseman in a certain way.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I think this season in particular that's been true, that Cronwell's underrated. Like, I got to be honest, when Lidstrom left and Cronwell assumed his role as the #1 defenseman, and let's think about in particular his role as the point man on the power play. That the power play started to go through Cronwell instead of Lidstrom now. I thought he struggled a little bit with that. I thought he got his shots blocked too often. I thought that he just didn't. He seemed like he had some self-doubt back there in terms of just enough to where it didn't run smoothly, and that's not true anymore. He's now Lidstrom's been gone long enough now, and he's figured it out. Like I think and I have no way to quantify this, but I'm convinced that he's getting more shots through this season than he has in the past. That he's figured it out, and I actually had said to Nick. In an email, he and I had exchanged some emails. I said, I got to wait for you to make about $1.5 million. I said, rent yourself out to every team in the league to show them how to get their pucks through to the net, because no one was better at it than Nick Lidstrom. And it almost seems like he's talked to Cronwell, because now such a high percentage of Cronwell's shots get through, and it's really making a difference, I think, on the power play. And I think he's figured it out, and he's having a good, solid year defensively. I understand your point about Ericsson, but what I like about him is, he's one of the few physical guys on the team. His size, he knows how to make it matter. and he can play, and he's comfortable playing against the best players in the league. And there's some big centers in this league, and he's out there and he can deal with them. So, there's no perfect hockey players, and he certainly makes mistakes, but I think he's proven that, he may not be like perfectly suited to be a top pairing defenseman, but he works on this one because he's with Cronwell, and I think they have good chemistry. And on other teams, obviously, he would be a second pairing guy, but I think here it works out okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the pairing is not here, so let's go Danny DeKeyser and Eric Zidlicki as far as trades 3 and 4.
Yeah, well, I don't know what they ultimately are going to decide to do, but certainly Danny DeKeyser is he's a better player than he was last season, simply on the basis of experiment. It's the skating that sets him apart from others around the league. But to me, the difference in his game is like he's never really been, for a guy that skates that well. When I think of a guy that skates well, usually he's a dynamic offensive threat. And DeKeyser really in his career has never really been that guy. Like, he skates amazingly well, but he's not Paul Coffey. And I guess I think he sort of has figured that out, that, boy, I can skate so well that I can get myself into position to be even a more offensively productive than I've been in the past. And I think his shot is a little bit underrated as well, and I think he's just going to get better and better. Right now, like, he still doesn't have the reputation. Like, if the World Cup was this summer, I'm not sure Danny DeKeyser would be on the U.S. team. There's a lot of really good defensemen, and I've talked to some of the powers that be, and they see him as just sort of below that level yet. He's still sort of figuring out, because the American defense is so accomplished. I mean, you're talking about Ryan McDonough and Suter, Seth Jones, who are just a little more advanced than he is. But I think that he has the potential to be among the top American-born defensemen in the game.
Well, it's interesting you would say that, because, again, talking around the league, and, guys like to kind of bust my chops and get me going, but when they look at DeKeyser, they think he's very overrated. The people in Detroit have this guy as being some sort of 1 or 2, and if he's a 4 at best and maybe a 5, that he's kind of reached his peak. I think that's unfair. I think he walked in from Western Michigan, came in, had a 10-game stretch before he got hurt, which really catapulted the Red Wings into the playoffs. Mike Babcock, who, as you said, doesn't really sit around and praise his guys that much, really was complimentary towards DeKeyser when he got here, and I think has always been complimentary. So is DeKeyser, because he's not flashy, he just gets the job done, is maybe undervalued by some of these players, pundits around the league, and maybe in Team USA hockey as well?
Well, I mean, I think that is true. I mean, I think they just don't see him, and I think that's the perception that Detroit, because it was almost like they picked up a bonus player. They didn't draft him, they didn't develop him.
He was born here, so you got him.
Yeah, you got him, and so now you're making him out to be better than he really is. But I just think it's a matter of him having never explored the depths of his offensive ability. And a guy that can skate that well should be better offensively than even he showed in college. He can just, and I think his mindset was all defensive. So I think he's got a much higher upside. I don't think he's there yet in terms of having a national reputation, but I think he has the potential in order to do it. And then Zidlicki, which is the latest acquisition, he's just been around a long time, and he knows how to be a transition defenseman, and he's survived for this long because he has value. It's not like a guy who he's got a lot of offensive skills, but he's such a detriment defensively that you can't use him. Like, he doesn't have to be a power play specialist. I don't think he's a world-class defender, but I think he can hold his own out there. And I don't think he's Rafalski, as I've said before, because I know he's sort of compared to him because of his offensive ability, but Rafalski was also an exceptional one-on-one defender. I don't think Zidlicki is a exceptional one-on-one defender, but I think he holds his own. And he's not going to cost your team to have him out there. So, and having the right-hand shot, as I said, anybody who watched that game, the last game when they beat the Rangers, a very good team, to see him over there in what used to be the Brendan Shanahan position on the left wing open there and sending the puck across and getting that shot on goal that didn't score, but that's what they've been lacking, and that I think is what will help the team in the long run.
The thing that struck out about Zidlicki when I watched him against the Rangers, he's not a big man by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
And maybe because the adrenaline was going, he wanted to impress his teammates, but he was an ornery little sucker out there. I mean, he would like to mix it up a little bit. He was not afraid to do what it took to play defense. Granted, you could tell he might not be a great defender, but he and maybe this is where experience pays off. He picks and chooses his time and his moment, and he had a little bit more of a physical upside than I was aware of.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't play as long as he has and play afraid. I mean, you just can't. You don't last that long. I mean, they find those guys out early, and they're not around anymore. So for the fact that he's still around and he's, the Red Wings were not the only team in the NHL that wanted to get this guy. They saw this as perhaps one of the undervalued players in the marketplace. He didn't get a lot of attention, although I think that was mostly because people heard he really didn't want to leave New York, that his family was comfortable there and he wanted to stay there. That's why I think some people thought he might have ended up with the Islanders, because I think many people, including myself, thought they should have gotten another defenseman. I think you're right. I mean, I think he is a little bit feistier than you expect. I mean, he's such a slight guy that he can't really play a heavy game because I think that would hurt him more than help him. So. But the older guys that have been around, they understand the geometry of the game. Like, he knows where he needs to be effective. He knows how early he can leave to help the offensive rush. Like, he's got all that figured out. He's not guessing. Danny DeKeyser's still guessing a little bit about when he should go or when what he should do. There's no guess with Zidlicki. He's done this 100,000 times. And he knows when he's taking the chance and when he's not, where I think, DeKeyser is sort of figuring that out.
Now, will he be somebody, I guess, again, depending on how this season plays out, he's only played one game as a Red Wing, that the Red Wings would consider maybe bringing back, signing a 1-2 year deal, maybe a 1 year deal, sweeten it up with some more money up front or something, or do you see this strictly as a rental situation with him?
I think it's a rental, but I mean, I would never say never. I mean, if the Red Wings won the Cup and everybody's excited and he played real well, but at some point, the Red Wings have a lot of prospects down in Grand Rapids. You got to give these guys the opportunity. I mean, one of the criticisms of the Red Wings around the league is, hey, everybody admires the fact that, as Kenny Holland likes to say, they like to make sure their prospects are overripe. But when you do that, sometimes you get stuck with the problem of eventually they get up and they're out of options, and you got to make a decision. But you haven't seen them all that much at the NHL level. Polkinen is a great example on that. I mean, the Red Wings are going to have to make a decision on him next year because he's going to be out of options. But they really haven't seen a lot of him up in playing against NHL competition. So I think. I'm sure Ken Holland looks at it two ways. If Zidlicki proves that he's better than everyone else, then he could put up there, then he'll give him the opportunity to re-sign. But I think you have to look at Marchenko and Sproul and all that and start to weave those guys in. The other element is, in order to effectively manage your cap, and I think this is lost sometimes on fans, is you have to build in having, in my opinion, 7 or 8 guys that are on entry-level contracts, because that allows you to pay the top guys the money they're going to get. If you don't have those guys coming in, you run into problems like the Boston Bruins are in now. The Boston Bruins, they signed Torrey Krug today and Riley Smith, that's Brendan Smith's brother. They've given them close to $7 million. Now they're at $60 million, and they have Soderberg they have to sign, Dougie Hamilton. They've got another 3 free agents. They don't have their backup goalie signed. Well, why are they in that position? Because they haven't drafted real well, and they don't have a lot of guys on entry-level contracts. And they've added Brent Connolly. And the other day, I said I thought that was a great signing, but he's a restricted free agent too.
Right.
So
Right.
by not bringing in the guys, you make it hard to manage your cap. So I think. You're asking me whether I think Zedlick would be back. If I had to guess, I'd guess no, because they've got so many defensemen coming. And if you're going to give Zedlicki $4 million for a year or $5 million, it just makes it hard. When you can, bring in one of those young guys that are still on entry level, and so you can still have some money. I mean, you got to start. Darren Helm will be an unrestricted free agent, not this upcoming season, but the season after. Abdicator. You got to start planning to have money for them. So I think the Red Wings are going to have to try to work in some of these younger guys next season.
Right, your mid-career Red Wings are starting to hit that free agency mark, and we're going to get into that situation. But let's go to the final pairing, and we'll bring in some of the kids here too. But probably the 2 most unpopular defensemen on Detroit's roster for whatever reason, Quincy and Brendan Smith. And I think it really gets the fans going when why is Mike Babcock pairing these 2 guys together? But I thought Quincy, since last year at the All-Star break, has been nothing but good. And I really do feel that way. And I've always liked Brendan Smith, although I still believe he's a hybrid player where at Wisconsin he seemed to play kind of like a rover position where, just get him set up for a one-timer because he does, and he's showing it occasionally in Detroit. He has a wicked shot, which is really a laser beam and quite accurate. I mean, that kid can shoot the puck, but, I think he's been trying to concentrate on just being a good defender lately. But let's look at that, shall we say, the 5 and 6 defensemen on this Red Wing unit.
Well, Brendan Smith really reminds me of one of my favorite people in the league, Jack Johnson, who people in Michigan certainly know. He went to the University of Michigan. To me, they're very similar players. They love to take a chance, and they're like wild stallions. It's hard to break them. They just want to go. But what's interesting about Brendan Smith is he's not really been as offensive that the Red Wings thought he was going to be. They thought he was going to be a points guy. They really did. I mean, he was obviously in college, and they thought he was going to, create more offensively. But I think, he still may contribute a little bit more. I think personally that he's made great strides, and I think he's one of those guys that teammates like. He'll play feisty. He'll fight whoever he needs to fight. He'll do what he has to do. He makes mistakes, but if he's your 6th defenseman, I think you're fine. In fact, I think you got to be pretty happy with that because he has skill, he has skating ability, he has passion, he's feisty. I think he's played more conservatively. Some fans may disagree, but I think he has. I think he's improved, and the old adage used to be that you really need to get 300 games in the NHL before you figure out how to play defense. So, we still got some time with him. But I like him, and I think that if he's your 5th and 6th defenseman, you're still being okay. And your assessment of Quincy is right on the money. I was trying to look it up right here because I looked recently, and I noted that he had gone like a lengthy period of games without being a minus in any game. Now, I don't think that's true anymore, but he had an extended period when it was like that, and as it turned out, that was a pretty good plan B because that was plan B to re-sign Quincy if they couldn't get any of the big guns, and he's really been effective, and I think he knows his limitations, and that's important as well. I mean, he doesn't try to do more than he can do. I think there's a bit of a quickness issue with him. In terms of, he's certainly not a guy that can motor up the ice. But, he's had a good season. He's played well. I don't think he's the long-term solution for the Red Wings, but for now, I think he's been very effective.
Well, I can remember when they first acquired him through, Colorado through Tampa Bay and gave up a #1 pick, I believe, to Stevie for him. The joke around, among the media at the time is that Detroit reacquired Kyle Quincy. Unfortunately, it's the Kyle Quincy who used to play for them, not the Kyle Quincy who played for L.A. or for Colorado. But I think he came here, Kevin, quite frankly, and was gripping the stick too tight. He really wanted to, because the story was it came down to him and Darren Meach, who they were going to keep or who was going to be the guy, and they really decided on Meach. They kind of traded him to L.A. and then he came back and had a lot to prove. But I think he's finally comfortable and settled in his role. And again, we've talked about this before. I think a lot of that has to do, as they mature, as we all do, you kind of find your place in life and what your calling is or what your limitations are. And I think you're absolutely correct. Whatever happened at the midpoint of last season, right after the All-Star break, Kyle Quincy has kind of found what kind of hockey player he is, and he pretty much sticks to that recipe, if you will.
Well, yeah, and I just looked it up, and this really just brings home. He's had 15 consecutive games without having a minus game. He's only had one minus game since the first of the year.
Wow.
That's a guy that understands his role. And look, he's playing. He's played more than 20 minutes on some nights, and a lot of nights. Like in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, last 10 games, he's played 20 or more minutes 7 times, and he's not been a minus player. I mean, I don't know that you can be more effective than that. The Red Wings have played well in that, but they've given up some goals, and he obviously has not been. Now, he doesn't. He's got 3 points in that period as well. I mean, he's not going to be a guy that's going to produce points. But I think he's one of the reasons why the Red Wings have played so well defensively. Is he's just been a sound guy. And I think he's really earned the respect of everyone in the room for just the way he's sort of figured it out and does his job every game.
Well, let's look at some of the youngsters. Marchenko is impressed. I think common knowledge or conventional wisdom in Detroit is that he's going to be on the blue line next year for the Red Wings. Xavier Ouellet, even though he's a left-hand shot, has been impressive. And then we keep hearing about Ryan Sproul and kind of what was emanating from the Red Wing camp last offseason in July when they were trying for Matt Niskanen or Dan Boyle or whomever, anybody not named Kyle Quincy, as you kind of said. They were it was our guys, and including, don't forget a guy, he's small, he's kind of like Zidlicki, but Nick Jensen, who's also a right-handed shot. He's a hell of a hockey player and doing very, very well for Grand Rapids right now. I really like him, but that they thought that their youngsters on D were a year away. Now, I know they want to make it a gradual transition. So if, let's say, Detroit decides that Marchenko is ready next season, that Ouellet is ready next season, and that Sproul has to come up here and let's see what we have in him, how does that alter this defense? Who do they get rid of? Because they seem then to be a little bit top-heavy on the blue line. I mean, they have a lot of guys that are ready. They have some guys that are signed. Zidlicki might be gone, but how do you create enough ice time to see if these guys legitimately are NHL ready?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's what I was alluding to. Obviously, when I was talking about, I thought that Zidlicki wouldn't be back just because I think it's getting crowded. But this is what I mean. Nobody has told me this, but my sense is this: Sproul is a guy that has almost a better rep. And when I say this, it's going to sound like the Red Wings don't like him, and they do like him. But I'm just saying he actually has maybe a greater reputation in the NHL community as a top or a coveted prospect than he has in Detroit. Maybe because they've got other guys that they like for whatever reason. So I think he's a guy. To me, he's always felt like a guy that could get moved. As the Red Wings look this summer to make some changes depending on what happens, or they want to add some people. He's the piece that you could maybe move to get, if you were interested in Dion Phaneuf. I think the Maple Leafs would be interested in Sproul if you were trying to get another veteran defenseman, or you were looking for a premium right-hand shot defenseman as well. I mean, I think he's a guy that you could move, because I agree with you. I think Marchenko, and what I like about Marchenko is, I think when he showed up here, he wasn't like a kid, that's sort of risen up from the junior ranks. He's a guy that played in the KHL, Um, and even though a lot of people think the AHL is a better league than the KHL, I think that the KHL has a different kind of pressure for Russian players, and that is that it's covered over in Russia in the media as much as the NHL is covered here. So he faced a lot of pressure over there, and so I think that made him more ready. I think he was more advanced because he played under pressure-filled situations over there, and you could see that. Like, he's been a poised player since he's come up. And I think there's some potential there, and I think the Red Wings know that. You need 8 defensemen. So next year you could keep the guys they have here if Zidlicki is gone, and you could end up with Marchenko and Aulette as well. And if Sproul gets moved out, or who knows, maybe Aulette gets moved. I don't think all 3 of those guys will be around next season. I think one of them would be dealt, and before I thought maybe Polkinen was a trade guy. Now I'm wondering if they see him as a guy that could slot in. I mean, they have to have a hedge against the possibility that they could lose a Darren Helm or an Abdicator. I don't think they will. I think Helm, both those guys are going to stay here. I mean, obviously Abdicator is a Michigan guy. By Michigan, I mean he's a Michigan native,
Right.
and I think Helm, likes it here. But who knows? Winnipeg could throw a lot of money at him. He's a speed guy. He's an impact guy. So I think you got to keep some forwards around as well. And the guy that they got to make room for at some point is going to be Dylan Larkin. So it'd be interesting to see how that is. Now again, Johan Franzen's future plays into this as well. I mean, at this point, I think we've got to, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on television, but, he's been out a long time. He's had continuing problems with concussions. At some point, I've seen a number of players in my career whose careers have been undermined by concussions. At some point, you can wonder whether he could be one of those candidates as well.
Well, let's get back and just look at it, and I'll ask you a real broad question. Do you believe the Red Wings' defensive core is solid enough for them to be legitimate Stanley Cup contenders this year?
Yes, I do. Yeah, for sure. I just think that it's a cohesive group with one not superstar but star defender in Cronwell. I mean, I think he's the only guy that around the league everybody would say, well, we got room for that guy. Like every team would make room for Cronwell. I don't think you could say that about any other defenseman on the Red Wings. There are teams who don't have room for Eriksson. There are teams that don't have room for Danny DeKeyser. Now, I don't say that to criticize. I just say that's just the fact that the Red Wings have a group that's come together and played well, but they're not viewed as a blue line that has a lot of incredible talent on it. Even though those who watch them every day can point out that DeKeyser is just an elite level skater, and that Eriksson has the ability to be a shutdown guy because he's a big-bodied guy and will stand up for his teammates and can do that. And Quincy has developed a level of consistency that would probably surprise the folks that don't see him every day. So, I think the group is good enough to compete, but I think over the long run you will have to upgrade it. I don't think there's any question about that.
Well, let's Kevin. Let's look at maybe the contract situation. You mentioned the Boston Bruins and the situation they are with guys, and you look at Chicago. There's speculation that this summer, even though Stan Bowman is kind of a magician the way he works it, but they might have serious cap issues. Now that the Red Wings have a young core, and Dylan Larkin could be here. Sorry, Michigan fans, sooner rather than later. And if Mantha scored a goal and seems to be getting acclimated. I call him the Greek kid, and I can get away with that because my mother, God rest her soul, is 100% Greek. Anastasousis, or he seems to be a legitimate prospect. I've heard many good things about him. How are they going to manage all this? Or, as you said, are Red Wing fans, even though we've heard a lot about some of these prospects for a number of years now, when they finally do hit the NHL, it's not going to be in the red and white. They're not going to be wearing the winged wheel.
Well, some of them will and some of them won't. I mean, there are two reasons why you have to have a great farm system. One is you need to feed your team, particularly with the entry-level contracts. The quicker that you can get them up here, that just helps your cap situation. But secondly is you need assets in order to trade, and I think that's the advantage they have. I mean, let's look at the roster now and say, what we've talked about the uncertainty of Johan Franzen. Daniel Cleary obviously is not long for the team anymore. His days of being a Babcock favorite are probably coming to a close. I think if there was a young player that is in danger of maybe losing his spot, it would be Thomas Jurko. I think he's a guy that could be traded as well. He hasn't been able to get off the fourth line. Now, some people can argue, well, he hasn't had the opportunity to show what he can really do. But when you get in that situation, you got to force the coach to move you off that line. He has been unable to do that. He hasn't been able to force Babcock to move him off that line. Now that's hard in this group, but if you want to get the ice time, you got to do something big, and he hasn't been able to do that. He's had some chances. We've all watched him make plays where you said to yourself, boy, could he play in the top six at some point? The answer is yes. But I see him as a guy that over the long run, perhaps they may decide to trade him. And then we've the guy that I think there's two guys. Johan Anderson is another guy that I think his spot is vulnerable as well. I mean, I think he's a very useful player, but he doesn't have anything that distinguishes him to the point where he's not vulnerable. He has some vulnerability.
With Joachim Anderson, I think a lot of people are surprised he's still on the team, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely right. So, and the guy who is safe forever and a day is Luke Glendening, who has just been fantastic. His speed makes a difference. He's relentless. He just never quits. And I see him as a potential Chris Draper type of player. And by that I mean it would not be unthinkable to me that in one of these seasons, depending on opportunity and injuries and where he could score 20 goals. Now, just all based on how relentless he is and that speed. I just think.
I thought it was water, but Luke Glendening at 20 goals. Look.
Yeah. I mean, Chris Draper scored 20 goals.
Well,
the guy we called Hands, facetiously. So, no, I mean, he is not a goal scorer. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying this guy works so hard and he has so much speed and he never gives up that you can't rule it out. That one season it's just all going to come together, and I think he's going to be, an 8 to 10 goal scorer, one of those type deals. But I just think it depending on what happened, I mean, if we looked up now what Chris Draper had 20 goals, I think, with just one season. And I want to look it up because.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, the only time Chris Draper really ever got upset with me is that I would say that sometimes in the press box we joke around that we'd always say, Draper breaking in on is Chris Draper, clear cut the goalie, he's in on a breakaway, we'll be back right after this.
Yeah, it's one of my I love Chris Draper, but yeah, no, absolutely. Okay. Now this makes my point exactly.
Okay.
This is Chris Draper's this is Chris Draper's goal scoring seasons. He had I'm going to just start when he started playing regularly. He had 7, 8, 13, 4, 5, 8, 15, 14. Now listen to this. 24. Okay, 24, and then 10, and then 14, 9, 7, 7, 6. My only point about Glendening is he's going to be one of those guys who's going to go, what do you have, 2 last year? So,
yeah.
2. He had 2. He's got 8 now, I think. So let's just say he gets 10. He might have 11 next year. He might go 9 and 13, and then out of the blue, when he's about 28, he's going to have 20 goals. Just because, of all the little things. I mean, he's just such a valuable role player. Coaches like him. And I just think so. And the other guy we haven't talked about is a guy that I think is highly underrated, and he's just valuable, is Drew Miller. Now, everybody sees him as a guy that I think could easily be replaced, but this is a veteran guy who doesn't cost you a lot of money, who knows what his role is, who can kill penalties. You have to have guys like that on your team. You can't have a bunch of guys who are goal scorers. You need guys like Drew Miller. Now, he doesn't have a safe roster spot because guys like that come and go. But I think that he has a job for the next couple of seasons because I think he does what he's supposed to do, and you need guys like that, and he doesn't cost you a lot of money.
Well, let's look at it because Datsuk's deal has 2 more years after this season, I believe. It was a 3-year contract extension that kicked in this year. Zetterberg is here forever. He's obviously not going anywhere. And, maybe this is an unfair question to ask you, Kevin, but do you think that eventually, regardless of how astute the Red Wings are, massaging the salary cap and, young prospects and making deals and all that, that they are going to face salary cap issues? Although, much like everyone's saying, well, the Red Wings aren't going to make the playoffs this year, they always manage and seem to find a way. I mean, I believe that they're one of the best organizations in sport because they, no matter what is thrown at them, they're able to adapt, find a way to stay competitive, and get the job done.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they will face it because realistically, how many years do we think we're going to see Datsuk? Next year he has 2 seasons counting next year, and that would make him 39 then.
And he has said that he wants to end his career in Russia. In
Russia. That's right.
Something left.
Yeah. So if you got 2 more years out of Datsuk, I think you'd be happy with that. I mean, that's a cap hit of $7.6 million. And, I think we're only a couple years away from seeing an $80 million cap. The Canadian dollar is causing some issues, and it could be 71 and change next year because of that. But, the NHL is in a growth spurt, and, they're finding, ancillary revenue. This World Cup is going to generate a lot of money. I think we're going to see expansion. That's going to generate some money as well. We're going to see, these outdoor games have gone from just being things that were kind of a marketing plan to being moneymakers as well. So I think the cap's going to grow and be I think within 4 or 5 years we could be approaching $90 million. So I think the Red Wings have actually done a really good job of managing the cap, and you're going to get the entry level cap really helps these teams if you manage it well and you bring in your younger players. I mean, Mantha and Larkin, let's say both those guys turn out to be the kind of players they are meant to be. Those guys are going to be an entry-level $1 million players for 3 seasons. So, and they'll be coming up at a time when Datsuk is probably going to be leaving. And, by then, Tatar and Nyquist could be, and the Nyquist contract, I think, is an important one, too. He'll be a restricted free agent this summer. Now, Tatar they got for what? Just over $2.7 million. I think Nyquist is going to want more than that.
Right.
Yeah, but, how much more? It'll be interesting to see. And do they try to get into give him a little more money and try to buy him a little, buy a few years? So I think that's going to be an interesting negotiation. But I think that's a key one. And then, Yurko is up this season as well. But they have 1 more year out of Kyle Quincy, and I think, I don't know this, but, I mean, that could be his last season maybe because they got a lot of guys coming if any of those guys pan out. Brendan Smith is a restricted free agent. Now, what do you pay him? I mean, we've both spoken about how he's a high-risk guy sometimes. How much are you going to be willing to pay him? So a lot will depend on the development of these guys that are coming up. Polkinen, Larkin, Mantha, and, of course, from the defense, Olet, Marchenko, and Sproul. And as I've said, I think certainly Mantha and Larkin are going to be Red Wings. I think Pulkkinen, it's a possibility he could be moved. I think Marchenko's for sure going to play, and then I think either Aulette or Sproul will be traded at some point.
I agree with you. I mean, Ken Holland has told me we have to make a decision on Pulkkinen. Either he's a Red Wing next year or we're trading him.
Right.
It's not going to be like Nestor Sill, who now is playing for Carolina. We lose him for nothing, and they obviously think that Pulkkinen's a much better player than Nestor Sill. But I'm just kind of using that as an example. I mean, the one thing that they do hate, you know this as well as I do, it's losing a guy through waivers. Anytime a Red Wing player has to go through waivers, a prospect or something, very rarely do they. They get
no. And that just speaks to how well they drafted. I thought it was funny, by the way, that I had heard the discussion. Now, I didn't actually see the quote. I almost hate to pass this along, but it's such a funny story. I will anyway. That is that Jim Nill was quoted as saying that most people just assumed that he knew all of the Red Wing prospects, but he didn't know the kid in the third round that the Red Wings had taken, the Swedish kid. But basically, the story was that he said, but if the Red Wings took him in the third round, he's probably pretty good. And his scouts obviously knew him as well. But and I think that's one of the issues the Red Wings face is because they've drafted so well, they always have a lot of guys coming up at the same time, and they got to make some hard decisions. And the fact that they keep them down in the minors longer, and that can be a difficult issue. Like, they've seen players come up where they didn't have any idea whether the player was ready or not because they hadn't seen him much up at the NHL level.
Well, Kevin, there's so many avenues. We're almost running out of time. We do have a little time left, and I wanted to touch upon a couple of other subjects just during what you were talking about. But let's save the World Cup talk. Although I want to ask you, are you surprised that ESPN got back into hockey and made a pretty competitive bid to get back into hockey? I mean, they were pretty adamant. The ESPN executive said, "Listen, we have a lot of hockey fans in this building. We're all really happy." And I know, and I think NBC does a good job, and they really have exposed the game very, very well. I think NBC, especially with their, the NBC Sports Network. But is this a precursor of maybe ESPN is pretty serious? Even though I know there's a new deal with NBC. I guess look at the tea leaves. What does all this mean in the big picture? And because of the World Cup, does that mean we will see the NHL at the next Olympics?
Well, those are all great questions. Let me start off by saying that I think the NBC situation, I don't think they were brokenhearted about losing the World Cup. They'll be coming off the Olympics. They have the Paralympics coming at that time. Scheduling would have been tough for them as it was. The deal with NBC has been fantastic for the NHL. Just getting all of the playoff games on NBC and the treatment and the respect that NBC gives the NHL on its sports network. And, I thought it was interesting when I was there at the Hall of Fame induction, and I was witness to a fan walking up to Gary Bettman and said, "Thank you for putting the NHL on NBC," because prior to that, I had struggled to get games, and I never knew when they were on, and it was a real struggle for me. And now, because the NBC is so organized, and I know what's going on. I think it has a lot of programming to fill. They're happy to get back in the NHL. I mean, let's face it, hockey is really the only pro hockey or NHL hockey is the only sport they don't dabble in. So. I think they wanted to get back, and they have Barry Melrose, they have Steve Levy, Butchergrass. I mean, they have a lot of guys that are hockey guys and known to be hockey guys. Gary Thorne they had for their broadcast. I thought was a terrific broadcaster when they had him. So I think this is a good fit. I have said all along, although I brought this up to Gary Bettman and he shot it down, but anybody who watched baseball playoffs, the one game playoffs last year, knows how exciting those could be, and I thought this was a chance for the NHL to create more revenue, which they you always need, by going 7-8, 9-10, and playing the one game, and then they get into the tournament. So in other words, the season would be over just like baseball. Season in on a Sunday, Tuesday, 7 versus 10. Not 8 versus 9, and the winner of those games then go into the bracket as the bottom 2 seeds. And I just think it would be fantastic. It would be fun, and you could do just what baseball does. You could give those to ESPN, those games. That
Right.
would be, and you could charge big prices for them. I mean, can you imagine if one of those games was played in Toronto? You could charge $250 a ticket, or $300 a ticket. But Gary Bettman said that the league is not considering that because GMs feel that that would diminish the value of the regular season. I disagree with that. I think that don't get yourself in that position then. If you don't want to be in the 7 and 8 game, then finish 6th. It's that simple. And it's no different. It's just a game 7. We're moving right to game 7. That's all it is. So I see as the opportunity there maybe for someday up the road that maybe an ESPN could slot in and get that game, because I think ultimately that'll happen. It may not happen right away, but sooner or later they're going to be looking for revenue, and if they go up to 32 teams, we don't have enough. 16 teams is not enough to get in the playoffs, in my opinion.
Well, and let me ask you. I mean, Vegas is a shoo-in, right? I mean, they're making the arena.
Yeah. No. Here's the problem we have. Vegas, they'd like Vegas to be, but what nobody knows is whether or not the local people will support it. And they've gotten 7,000, or almost. I think they're over 7,000 now, but 7,000 season ticket deposits. But it's been a struggle to get those last 3,000, and you really want to see that done in 72 hours. You want everybody to flood the website and pay their $150. So no one really knows whether it will absolutely work in Vegas. They think it will, but they don't know. So I think they are sort of trying to do some marketing and trying to figure out exactly whether or not the locals will buy the tickets. We know that people in Detroit are going to fly out to Vegas and make a weekend of it when the Red Wings are out there. We know the people in New York and Chicago are going to do that as well. What we don't know is the people who live in downtown Vegas, whether they're going to go over to the game. So I think it's, they like the owner. Foley's a good guy. I've spoken to him. I think they're going to be there. They really need 2 teams in the West, though. And Seattle, they won't go there because there's no building. And Bettman has said, I'm not going in a temporary building. I need to have a building. So I don't know what they're going to do. It's going to be interesting to kind of sort that out.
Is Portland viable? Because I know they've had, the Winterhawks there forever.
Yeah, no, I mean, some people have said that as well. To me, a market that really should be considered that I never hear anything about is Houston. As we all know, there's the tradition there. Gordie Howe played there. They've had an AHL team there. They've got a building there. It's a natural rivalry for Dallas. They'd slot in. To me, you could do Houston and Vegas. And now you've got in Vegas, you've got natural rivalries for Arizona and for the 2 Southern Cal teams. You've got 4 teams that are within driving distance of each other. So.
Right. But then, just the NHL's that'll happen, and then Arizona will move to Quebec City.
Well, I think Quebec City is going to get a team. When Winnipeg didn't have a team, I wrote for about 4 or 5 years, don't worry, they're going to get a team. And the reason I wrote that is because people at the league told me that was going to happen. But Gary Bettman's history is he goes when he wants to go, not when the fans and the rest of us want him to go. He does it when it's best for the league. And, they needed a landing spot for Atlanta, and they got it in Winnipeg. And it was a perfect fit. And I think that's what they're going to do for Quebec. They're going to let them build that arena, and, some team's going to struggle, and maybe it'll be Florida. Their ownership group down there likes their situation now, and, they're trying to make it work. But, it would be a pretty smooth, easy transition if Florida went to Quebec if it had to be.
Well, I hope, if that is the case, I hope they are the Nordique and they go back to those uniforms. That was it wasn't a menacing uniform, but it was sure nice to look at. So,
I like it as well. I have fond memories of that. The only thing about the old Coliseum is one of my favorite arenas because to walk down from the press box to the dressing room, you had to leave breadcrumbs to find your way back because you went through this dark it was almost like in the movies where you see the castles and they have the secret chambers behind. Like you went down, you had no idea where you were, and you'd have to find your way up. So I always enjoyed that, trying to sort out how to get back to my seat.
All right, Kevin. Well, I really want to ask you about the Red Wings are about to play 3 games in 4 days. Tonight against the Calgary Flames, Saturday off, and then in Boston for an afternoon affair, national televised by NBC, and then they host the Edmonton Oilers. We'll have to save that for our next podcast, but Calgary, a real fun team to watch, so pretty good test for the Red Wings coming up, at least these next 2 games. And, the Oilers have nothing to lose. They're out to prove themselves, so 3 pretty big games for Detroit coming up.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the Calgary Flames, when Mark Giordano went down, everybody just wrote them off, and I wrote, and I still believe now, he's their most important player, he's their most skilled player, he's their leader, but they haven't won because of him. They've been winning because, they've got the good karma like Colorado last season. They've won 10 games by coming from behind in the third period. They feel good about themselves, they're confident. And, they're the kind of team that can overcome a Giordano. So you can't take them for granted. They smacked Boston again last night. They've won a couple of games. I would expect the Red Wings would win that game and win that game against Edmonton as well because they just haven't been playing well. And Boston has just not been the same team. So these 3 games are winnable for Detroit.
All right, Kevin, on that note, we will I'm not sure next week I have a little radio work at the end of the week on Thursday and Friday from 3 to 6. But we'll definitely do it either Monday or Tuesday. Will be our next one. Then maybe Wednesday, or maybe we'll move up the time later next week. But we will definitely be doing at least 2 of these, if not 3 of these, a week of the Red and White Authority. Thank you for the response, everyone. It's been great. Kevin, I didn't realize. I guess I should have known. There's a lot of Red Wings fans out there.
Yeah, there really are. That's why I enjoy doing them. So.
All right, Kevin. Thanks. We'll see you down at the rink, everyone. Have a safe and pleasant one. For the Red and White Authority, for Kevin Allen, I'm Art Regner. Take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.